Super excited to have you here today, Andrea.
Thanks.
Amazing job this morning. It was
Thank
just
you.
really, really great to hear from you. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah.
So maybe start off by telling me a little bit about yourself and your role at Walmart.
I've been at Walmart for 18 years. Actually grew up kind of in Walmart because my father worked for Walmart for about 21 years before I ever started at the company. And so today I'm the Executive Vice President of Sourcing, which is all of our private brand product for all of our markets around the world.
Wow, that's amazing. I love the picture I saw this morning of your dad.
That's a great one, right?
Walmart.
The
It's really
hair
good.
was fantastic.
Tell me that story again with him at Walmart.
Yeah. So my father worked in Walmart stores back when it was really getting its start. So he started, I believe, in 1981. And he worked his way up and was an assistant manager and did a lot of different things in a lot of stores around Kansas and Western Colorado. In this situation, he was stacking toilet paper or paper towels, I forget, some kind of household paper product. And somebody came up behind him and said, "I'd like to buy a fishing license." And my dad said, "Yeah, hold on one second. I got to make sure this stack is safe for the customers." And then he looks up and it's Sam Walton.
Oh, no.
So you can imagine in your 20s, you've just started at this company and you see the founder and he kind of starts shaking. He's like, "Mr. Walton." And he's like, "It's okay, son, calm down." And, hands him his driver's license. They exchange over the counter and he sells him his fishing license. And that culminated with him making a decision of whether or not he was going to go be a store manager or go be a buyer in Bentonville. And we moved to Arkansas in 1987, and he bought kitty litter.
That's amazing.
Yeah, kitty litter.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're back to your role in procurement for Walmart, leading procurement. It's a wide range of responsibilities, huge scope. How do you yourself stay focused and help your team stay focused?
Yeah, I think the key when you're dealing with a complex business that we run is simplicity. You can make anything complicated if you really try. The effort and the hard work is in simplification. And the more you can simplify your business and where your focus needs to be, the more easy it is for everybody to understand the mission, the why, and what's important and how to measure it. If you get bogged down in complexity, you'll get stuck in things that don't really matter and don't help support the customer.
Okay. I love that you talked about the customer. How does the customer fit into all of this?
Yeah.
And how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. At Walmart, the customer's at the center of everything we do because our mission is to help people save money and live a better life. So if you don't put the customer front and center, your decisions won't lead to the fulfillment of that mission. So how do you take costs out of the system? How do you give an amazing quality product? Where is there inefficiency or third parties that are disrupting or causing friction in our ability to serve that customer, whether it's quality, whether it's assortment offering, whether it's how fast we can get it to their door? It all circles around that core customer need, whether that is time, whether it is saving money, whether it is I need a Halloween costume in 2 weeks because I forgot to order my son's, which is a real story, and how am I going to get that in time? Like, that's all customer-driven decisions.
Yeah. So customers have gone through a lot of changes over the last 3 to 4 years. They've had to learn new ways to shop through COVID, felt the effects of global unrest, and now economic challenges like inflation. So how have you seen their shopping and purchasing behaviors and habits change throughout all of this?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of COVID, it was a bit of a panic. Everybody didn't know what to expect, and the runs on toilet paper. I actually, as a merchant at the time, I found it to be a really interesting period to understand customer behavior, because if you walk a store or a competitor or go online, the things that were in stock were the things they would buy under no circumstance. So one of them being sugar-free beef jerky. Like, I don't care how much we say keto is a trend, like nobody wanted that stuff. And then these weird puzzles and certain categories where it was completely wiped. Toilet paper, the only thing left were those wipes that were on the counter, like adult wipes. So customers are really interesting, and so watching customer behavior at peak times, but also in down times, that really tells you the state of our customer and the state of our nation on, are they trading into private brands? Are they trading out of private brands? Why? What's their price point threshold? If you only have $60, what are the things that are going to go out of your basket when inflation occurs? That really gives you the pulse of the nation and the pulse of the customer, and we see that so clearly as macro dynamics change.
I love that. Can you tell us a little bit more? And I love, how you described it this morning, how you personally as a leader stay close to the customer and build a culture where innovation can thrive within your team.
Yeah, the way that I stay close to the customer and the way I encourage my team to stay close to the customer, you've got to be where they are. And so if they're on TikTok, if they're in social media, if they're out there watching a certain show, like, you've got to be into that to see. You don't have to actually watch it and wear the t-shirt, but you have to be able to read where customers are at and understand the trends that are happening around you. So trying to live their everyday life, right? We have something called Eat What You Cook. That's where you go into a store and you're actually physically working in a store. You're not walking and doing a tour. You're shuffling boxes. You're putting stuff out on the racks. You're making sure that your products are on shelf, and you see how it comes in and you see how the customers experience that modular that you drew. Is it good? Is it easy to find? Did I put stuff in the right place? Does it even fit on the shelf? So those kind of things, like boots on the ground, that's how you really start to understand the customer, and you have to do the work to do that. In addition to data, trends, things that you can really start to see, different trend services and so on and so forth. But there's no substitute for you actually being in the detail to understand that core customer. And then from a team perspective, the environment that you create matters a ton for how they will serve the customer and how they'll show up from an innovation perspective. So I talk a lot about psychological safety. A lot of people make light of that and think it's puppies and rainbows and unicorns, and it's not at all, actually. We forgot over time how to respectfully disagree with each other and give tough feedback and have hard conversations. And so we retreat into our corners and, lob bricks over the wall, like that person's bad because they believe this, and so on and so forth. So a lot of psych safety is bringing people to the table, learning how to communicate with each other again, learning how to trust somebody, even if you don't agree with 100% of what they believe in or their perspectives. If you can just bring people back to the middle to have a really respectful conversation, you learn to communicate really well and to respectfully disagree. And that's where the magic comes in, and that's where I really see my teams deliver the most value. When they're willing to hash it out in a room and say the hard things and call each other out and give each other feedback when that behavior is not great, that's magic.
That's awesome. I love that you shared about psychological safety, and I'm curious, you shared a framework with us about how you approach that, what behaviors you emulate as a leader to build that safety into your teams. I'm curious if you can share more.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about as it relates to psych safety, I can say psych safety is important. That means a little bit to the team. If I actually show behavior that models that psychological safety, that really moves the needle. So if somebody says something that I disagree with, if I shut it down as a leader, they'll never raise their perspective again. If I say that's interesting, tell me more, even if I think it's a terrible idea and we'll never do that, that creates that openness, and that behavior drives whether or not they're willing to engage in that. But most importantly is what you recognize and what you reward. So say do recognize. If I promote somebody who's an absolute jerk and does not foster psychological safety, I'm recognizing behavior that's counterintuitive to what I say and do. That's the biggest derailer you can have in trying to drive a transformation of a culture. So what I say, what I do, what I recognize, all of those have to be in alignment to build trust. And when any one of those three is out of alignment, trust breaks, and people don't fully believe the authenticity of what you're trying to deliver.
Okay, I love that. Tell me a little bit more about when you're building a strategy, you're making changes in your value chain. How does that affect other parts of your value chain?
Yeah, so in terms of like driving a transformation in the value chain so you have to think about end-to-end connectivity on those pieces. So if you make a change at the beginning, what are the downstream impacts to the other pieces of it? So I like to think about it as a little circular graph. So if this is the first stage of the value chain, the first mile, raw materials, commodities, decisions I make there at the design phase, at the production phase, all of those things will have an impact on how the customer experiences that product. If I pick the wrong packaging, that could impact the ability to recycle that material. So all of those things are connected, and what I encourage the team to think through is the squeezing of a balloon. So if I make a decision here, while it might save me money on this stage, or raw materials or production, Does it have a negative consequence further down the line that we need to anticipate and make a conscious decision on? Because if you optimize for one part of the value chain, you could completely derail other pieces. It's all end-to-end connected.
I love that. The squeezing the balloon analogy is just so such a great visual for teams. What are you holding your sourcing team accountable to in terms of staying close to the customer, and also skills that they would need to be able to kind of see that end-to-end value chain? And what practically is your sourcing team doing to make sure that they understand the implications of a decision upstream?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I try to focus my team on, and I mentioned the simplification, this is it embodied, but the three things that I measure them on are trust, value, and resiliency. Value being everything you would expect it to be. As a sourcing organization, you're incentivized to make sure that you're lowering cost of goods, that you're removing inefficiency, that you're doing anything that could help drive value in the supply chain. Trust is everything that you would expect it to be from a quality standpoint, regenerative packaging, regenerative sourcing, regenerative farming practices. All of those things are tied to trust as well. It's also our relationship with our suppliers, our relationships with our merchants, how we show up, and then relationships with our customer. Are we delivering quality that we're super proud of? Is it in the right tiering of value? Is it super premium? Is it opening price point? Even if it's our opening price point product, there's a sense of pride in making sure that that quality of that item is something that you'd be proud to serve your family or to give to your children. So that's a huge part of that trust side. And then resiliency is probably the most overused word in the last 5 years, especially with COVID. But for us, it means the ability to minimize risk and maximize opportunity inside of the value chain. So where do we have opportunities to build redundancy into our supply chain and go further upstream on the raw materials standpoints? Where do we have risk? How do we mitigate that risk, and what does that mean to make sure that we have product on the shelf however customers choose to shop?
I love that framework, and you talked a little bit about how that's helping to empower your team to make those decisions. And I'm curious, when you think about trust, can you share some examples of how the trust you've built with suppliers is helping to bring innovation into Walmart? Yeah,
so the framework and the empowerment is driven off of I can't be everywhere. My leadership team can't be everywhere. We're in many countries around the world. So the challenge becomes, how do I simplify a framework that everybody understands in multiple different languages? How do I make the best decision on behalf of the customer that I'm serving? Whether that's in Mexico, whether that's in Canada, whether that's in the US, I have to empower them to be able to make the best decision with their suppliers on behalf of the customer. And that simplified framework gives them decision points beyond cost of goods to make sure that we're proud of the quality that we're putting on the shelves, and we're doing it in a resilient way.
When you think about resilience being one of those three things that you talk with your team about, how is Walmart using innovation to strengthen resiliency in sourcing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways we're doing it. The two that I tend to talk about externally are supplier development and our work around innovation and aggregate further on the first mile. So supplier development, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about now. We've really started to think about what kind of pipeline do we need for the future to make sure that we have the products we need to serve our customers, again, however they choose to shop. And so there are gaps in where we don't have suppliers, where we desperately need new capabilities, new categories. There's emerging categories where we don't have the full breadth of the suppliers that we need. So part of that work is starting super early stage when they're first starting out as new entrepreneurs and making sure that we're giving them the opportunity to be successful. So the program that I talk a lot about is Vriddhi in India. Yeah. It is Vriddhi means growth, and it's our micro, small, medium enterprise program where we take entrepreneurs, and we're agnostic whether or not they sell Walmart. They might be on Walmart Marketplace, they might sell Amazon, they might sell other retailers. Totally fine, there's no obligation that they actually sell Walmart. But we invest in mentoring and training and education on some really basic things like running a business, how to cash flow manage, how to think about marketing and advertising, all the way to after they graduate, they have the ability to be part of our export program for Walmart. And we've actually had one graduate all the way through, Vardamom. They're a yarn company, and they started in Brithy, went through our export program, and they're now shipping Walmart US. So that's one way that we're spending time thinking about innovation and making sure that we've got the right resiliency from a supply chain perspective. The second one is, where might we need to do things differently? Where do we have risk in the value chain or risk in our supply where we need to think about things a little bit differently? And the example I'd give here is a company like Ruby Laboratories.
Yes, I love this example.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorites. So, CO2 and emissions and the challenge that we have with climate change, that's something that we're all trying to think about how we might solve. This company, they replicate the process of photosynthesis, and they take that CO2 and they turn it into cellulosic material. And we have a partnership with them on two fronts. One is the collection of the CO2 and how do we take emissions out of our manufacturing processes and our value chain. And then two, how do we use that cellulose and turn it into apparel? But if you know anything about cellulosic material, you can turn it into a million different things. You could turn it into paper, you could turn it into a cardboard box. So you take what you see as a problem, CO2 and emissions, and you turn it into a new raw material. That's incredible.
Amazing. I love that story. How did you find out about Ruby, or what are ways that you scan the industry for innovations like this?
That's a really great question. And we partner with a lot of academia. I think this one actually came through a partnership with a professor at a university and a recommendation that we follow up and say, hey, they're doing this interesting thing. But we're connected, with different universities, different trade groups. I personally do a ton of reading. I know Kyle, who's my lead for innovation, he spends a lot of time thinking about, what are the different problems that we're trying to solve, different publications. We're constantly scanning and snacking on 2-minute articles to try to find what that next solution might be, especially in critical industries where you've got a gap in, raw materials, you have a gap in finished manufacturing.
Awesome. So what's one thing, Andrea, that you'd want the audience to take away from today?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I would say is that the solutions are probably out there. We just have to find a new way to apply it. Some of the industries that we work in aren't the sexiest industries. They're not cutting edge. They're not, the edge computing or something that people are really excited about. I'm not building Apple devices, right? I'm in retail.
Yeah. $5 t-shirts.
$5 t-shirts, 50-cent canned green beans. Like, it's not the sexiest of industries, but it's really important. And so how do we start to be really open and start to ideate, collaborate, invite outside-in perspectives to learn how we might do this in a different way? Because if we can automate the manufacturing of a car down to the minutia of a tiny button or light, surely we can figure out a $5 t-shirt.
We can do it. I know we can.
We have to. We have to. So that outside-in perspective allows you to think about problems in a new and different way and maybe apply them and find that technology that solves that problem that you've been kind of racking your brain on.
Thank you so much for joining us. Incredibly inspiring to hear from you, and thank you so much for being part of the 0-100 community.
Thanks for having me. Had a great time.
That's it for today's episode of the 0-100 podcast, Digitally Reinventing Supply Chain. See you next time.